Hey, everybody. You are listening to the Animalia Hour on KGVM. We are a podcast based in Bozeman, Montana, committed to environmentalism, human health, and redefining our relationship to other animals. We hope through this podcast to inspire you to live vegan for the same reasons. I'm Kevin.
I'm Lucy.
Hi, I'm Sarah.
Hey, Sarah.
Hello, everybody. Well, it's hunting season here in Bozeman and around the country.
Are we even a vegan podcast?
Okay. We hunt morels, but all right, sorry. So it's really not morel hunting season, but anyway, okay.
No, it's not
keep going.
morel hunting season,
Oh, shoot.
or huckleberry hunting season. Right. So it seems timely for us to discuss hunting. And we've done some research. Obviously, gets to be a big topic that we all feel like we've learned a lot researching for this show, but we definitely feel like there's a lot more to learn. But I think it's good to start the conversation or contribute to the conversation. And
yeah, I think it's interesting though too, right? With this idea, like we live among so many hunters in Montana, and everywhere we grew up. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, same idea, and I think it's part of the ethos of living here, along with ranching. Do you know what I mean?
Definitely.
And rodeo and all those good things. So, this show could seem like we're challenging the culture of where we live.
yeah, it feels a little. I don't know. I feel a little nervous walking into this topic for sure because, culture is powerful.
Yes,
Culture is powerful.
it's the most powerful thing, I think.
In fact, I have a little anecdote that I might fit in somewhere in the show, just because I teach preschoolers and they're all talking about their dads hunting, and something happened this past week. But we might get to that because, it just spoke to how much even these little 4-year-olds or 5-year-olds are already very enculturated into what their dad does and wants them to do when they grow up or get a little bit older,
Right.
and how it's so cool and
Right.
so very powerful.
Exactly. And I guess I'm just thinking like we're gonna talk about how things are done in Montana or in fish, wildlife, and parks. But again, I feel like it's the norm in Montana. So just the fact that we're talking about this stuff, we could seem crazy, but we'll see.
Yeah. So it is sometimes said that hunting is conservation. Have you heard that?
Oh yeah, I think that's so funny.
Hunting is conservation. And I mean, I was certainly, like probably everybody, I grew up in Missoula, as I've said on previous episodes, and I did hunt with my father 2 years. And he did explain to me all the talking points that these animals are overpopulating and there's too many of them, and hunting is necessary, and hunting is a more humane death for them than what they would experience if we did not hunt them and there wasn't enough food for them, and all of this stuff. And, the timing of the hunting season, it's all very humane, and without it, everything would be a disaster.
Isn't that crazy though? How much? And this is what I thought when we were doing the Humane hoax shows. And I feel like this is just a continuation of that. And even the word conservation, which existed long before humane meat. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I almost feel like the animal ag industry got it from hunting and the whole conservation model. Anyway, I find it fascinating that even in hunting, people are talking about humane killing.
Yeah.
I was just like, okay.
And it just shows how it's an important point for people because they do, it's still something that they have to address, that it has to be humane because we do recognize that they are sentient. You know, it's interesting. Anyways.
Yeah. Yes. And Ed Winters talks about how that logic, that altruistic argument, like the idea that I'm saving this animal from a gruesome, not very nice death, like that argument, if we take that logic, it doesn't apply to anything else. You couldn't say that person looks like they're 5 minutes away from a terrible heart attack. I think we better shoot them in the head, because dying of a heart attack would be so scary and so painful. Can you imagine? We can't apply it, we wouldn't apply it to cats and dogs. There are places, actually almost every place, right, has an overabundance of cats and dogs. And that's why, but we don't say, let's go out and shoot all the stray dogs and let's shoot all the cats in the street. We say, oh, let's let's promote fostering and adoption of pets, and let's spay and neuter them. But for some reason, with some species of animals that we conveniently like to shoot with a gun and eat, for some reason that logic seems to hold water for people.
Right.
But it wouldn't hold water if you applied it anywhere else.
Right.
So
very interesting.
So the idea of hunting being conservation, it's expressed in various ways that hunters pay for conservation, right? So that's a big...
Well, yeah, they
big
join
topic.
Membership organizations like Ducks Unlimited, for instance.
Well, yeah, and buying hunting tags, hunting licenses. But, I mean, again, let's look at the logic there. Like, first of all, they have a seat at the table because they're hunters. They're paying for conservation, and that's the way they want it. They don't want non-hunters to pay for conservation because, well, we'll get into it. But so hunters pay for conservation is the argument. Hunters are the true conservationists, or you hear people say hunting is needed to manage wildlife. All of these kinds of sentiments suggest that hunters and hunting are indispensable to the continued survival of wildlife in America. I think it might be fun to talk just really quick about how conservation even was born, how the movement was even born in this country. And it was because, I think a lot of people probably know, it started with Theodore Roosevelt, good old Teddy Roosevelt, who loved to hunt in this country and around the world. And so he and his other affluent male sportsmen that he was friends with, they were growing increasingly concerned about the fact that there were no hunting regulations in this country, in the United States. And so many species were on the brink of extinction. And so in order to ensure that future generations every year would have a surplus of game, quote unquote, game animals, they decided we need to like restrict some hunting. We need to pull back some of the hunting so that these species don't go extinct. So the original conservationists, first of all, they were hunters. Secondly, they were the only thing that fell under the umbrella of conservation was game animals, nothing else. And thirdly, what they were trying to do is say, we need to hunt less. We need to pull back on how much people are allowed to hunt because we've overhunted, and these animals are in danger of becoming extinct. And so if you look at today's conservation narrative, it's kind of been flipped on its head. Well, it's still run by hunters. It's still primarily focusing on game animals, nothing else. But now the argument isn't, oh my goodness, we need to pull back on hunting because we've overkilled animals. Now it's, oh my goodness, there's so many of them and they're overpopulating, and hunting is the only solution to this problem. That we need to get out there and cull so that they don't overrun the world, or our neighborhoods. So I'm taking some of today's conversation from an article that appeared in a publication called Rewilding Earth. You can find them at rewilding.org. And the title of this article is called Why Hunting Isn't Conservation and Why It Matters by Kevin Bixby, September 2020. He says, as an occasional hunter who has spent my entire career in wildlife conservation, I disagree with the idea that hunting is conservation. Hunting can be many things: family tradition, outdoor recreation, a source of healthy meat, but the claim that hunting is the same as conservation just isn't supported by facts. So I'd like to point out that we're drawing some of our information, some of our research, or most of our research actually, is not coming from vegan sources. These are not people who are non-meat eaters or in any degree. Like they are hunters, they are. But they are criticizing the current paradigm of conservation as hunting. So to talk about this new paradigm, I guess you would say, this rewilding paradigm, which is just, I think it's just more and more people are saying, the paradigm we've been operating under since our country was born, basically, which is just domination and gathering as many resources as we can without really regard for what's actually best and what's actually sustainable long term. Like that paradigm is no longer serving us in various ways. And we really need to start looking at ecosystems and not just game animals and protecting game animals, but how every species is so important in an ecosystem. Right. And if you take some out or you add new ones, exotic ones in, like it has terrible consequences.
Right.
So just to give you a little flavor of this rewilding paradigm, the Rewilding Institute, their vision statement says, "We live for the day when gray wolves and grizzly bears have connected habitat from Mexico to Alaska, when pumas have reclaimed their homelands east and west, when salmon and other migratory fish swim freely up and down our continent's rivers, when the oceans are teeming with whales and sharks, and when all native species regain natural patterns of abundance and distribution." And so they have all kinds of initiatives, and they and groups like them are pushing for different legislation to start to change the paradigm, to start to change even how these wildlife agencies are funded. So the idea being wildlife and our forests and our ecosystems, they don't belong to anybody. They don't belong to any of us. They belong to all of us in a way. They're a trust that we are responsible to protect for everybody's health and for future generations. And so to think that one little special interest group, the hunters and fishers, should have complete power over this trust is what's being brought into question.
Right. Interesting.
And one thing you might have noticed is that they talk about wolves and grizzly bears and sharks. And one of the problems, one of the flaws with the hunting as conservation argument is that we have gotten rid of, or we have completely, what's the word? What we have done to the predatory animals, the bears, the grizzly, like the wolves, that they are, and they continue to be
eradicated,
villainized, and and exactly hunted, overhunted, removed with serious consequences. And I guess this is like a time to go ahead and say, why have we done that? Why have we gotten rid of
the apex
predators? Like, what has been our rationale? What is it?
Ranching,
right? Yes. Animal agriculture. Right. So it's like this idea, this understanding, this paradigm that, first of all, animal agriculture is good and necessary and natural. Well, if you believe that, which we were all raised to believe that,
right?
Even though it destroys ecosystems and it forces wildlife out. If you believe that, you naturally have to believe, okay, we need to protect these livestock from the natural world, right? And so we don't want wildlife interfering with our livestock in any way. We don't want competitors for their food. So we want to get rid of the herbivorous wildlife.
Right.
We don't want them to be preyed upon by any carnivores. And so if this is your idea of wildlife conservation, that for paramount to this is protecting livestock, then you're going to have complete disregard for conserving wildlife.
Yeah, you know what's so funny about this is that I know several hunters who they all get their meat, they go get their wild meat, their elk or their deer or whatever, and they get it processed. And they take pride in this wild meat, that it's free of all the antibiotics and it's free of all of the stuff that's in animal agriculture meat. And yet it's ironic that there's how connected it is. Like they take pride in the fact that I'm hunting and not consuming as much animal agriculture meat, but then the hunting relies on animal agriculture, right? They
are married. They're they're married to each other in Yeah.
It's almost like
they're inseparable.
It's the same with animal agriculture and big pharma. It's like animal agriculture is connected to so many things.
So, yeah, to go back to, I think, again, throughout our country's history, certainly, but I think Europe would fall under this as well. Like this idea that the top of the food chain, the apex predators, animals such as wolves, coyotes, or coyotes, however you pronounce it, bears and mountain lions help regulate population of grazing animals like deer and elk. So they're important. They're just as important as any other part of an ecosystem. And if there's a healthy population of the predators, it reduces pressure on trees and plants, which are critical to the survival of birds and smaller animals. So if we remove the predators, which we have done pretty successfully, and then the animals like deer and elk start to overpopulate, they start to tear down, they overgraze, they start to kill the trees and the plants. And then that in turn causes other smaller species of animals to suffer or to go extinct. Humans have persecuted carnivores out of fear of the wild, insistence on raising livestock in wilderness areas, and the belief that they kill too many of the animals that people want to eat. I really just appreciate this Rewilding.org institute because, you know, for the first time they're calling, it just seems it's so hard to get, you know, people who are concerned about the environment or concerned about climate change, or like it's so hard to find where they call out animal agriculture as being responsible for so many of our problems. Because again, I think people are like, well, animal agriculture is necessary, so let's not even consider that, talking about that.
Right.
But for this, again, a non-vegan pro-hunting, I think for the most part, organization, they're calling out the insistence on raising livestock in wilderness areas is, you know, the driver for getting rid of the carnivores.
Wow.
Yeah, this site also was saying, you know, like sometimes when we reintroduce, you know, carnivores, we have like a surprising, unforeseen positive thing, which again, it speaks to the complication that this is not a cut and dried. We haven't figured it out as humans,
right,
exactly how always to manage the land and the ecosystems and the wildlife. But they were saying that they had taken the wolves out of an area. And so in the Grand Tetons National Park, they reintroduced wolves into the habitat there. And they were surprised that the pronghorn fawn survival increased 4-fold with the introduction of wolves. And the reason was, without wolves in the Grand Tetons, the coyotes were, you know, getting too numerous.
Wow. And
coyotes, they are significant predators of the pronghorn fawns. But when the wolves came back, they culled some of the coyotes back. And then wolves aren't interested in eating pronghorn fawns. They're too small a meal for wolves. And so they don't bother the fawns, the pronghorn fawns. So and the adult pronghorns are too fast for wolves to catch because, yeah. So actually reintroducing wolves actually saved more pronghorn fawns. So that was kind of like, so again, the idea that every species in an ecosystem, we can trust nature, that, you know, however you want to say that every species in that ecosystem plays a role and helps to bring balance. And when we go in and we start manipulating and taking things out and adding things in, unforeseen things happen.
Right.
But what I also like about that is it brings up the point, like, let's compare natural predators to human predators. I think this is really interesting if you think about it. Natural predators, who do they target? They kill the old animals, the sick animals, the weak animals, the young. And this all helps bring a balanced ecosystem so that the strongest survive, basically. Right. And human predators, who do they target?
the biggest, the strongest, the biggest buck, the biggest rack.
Exactly.
Right.
Trophy. The strong, exactly what you said, the healthiest, the biggest, the strongest. And so it has been pointed out that, with certain populations of game animals, quote unquote game animals, we're actually seeing where because we're always killing the biggest and the strongest, we're actually making evolution go backwards with those species.
Wow.
So, for example, elephant tusks, like it's becoming more and more rare to find elephants who have tusks, because the ones with tusks, the ones who have the genetic code to have big tusks, are the ones that are killed, so they cannot have offspring. So their genes are not getting passed on. And so the ones without the gene to have big, strong tusks are the ones that are surviving. And it's also been found in bighorn sheep. The sheep's horns are getting smaller and smaller and smaller because over time, we're always killing the ones with the biggest horns.
Wow, that's crazy.
So human hunters target the strongest, the biggest, where natural predators, just the opposite.
Right.
And let's also talk about how natural predators, it's not an open and shut case. It's like it's more of a contest. They're more evenly matched. Predators can have short bursts of speed, but the animals they prey upon have more stamina and can run further and longer. So there's no guarantee that the predator is going to catch the prey. And some of the prey animals have, as we said, horns and antlers to kind of protect themselves, defend themselves against the predators. So it's more of an even match between prey and predator. They don't always get what they're hunting. Whereas, let's look at human predators, right? Like if a hunter was really what they say they are in terms of being manly, if they went out, if they had to go out there with just their bare hands and try to catch prey, they'd have no success, right? But they go out there with scopes. They go out there with high-powered rifles. They go out there with all sorts of tricks up their sleeves, like, odor masking products.
Right.
And so there's no chance that animal is going to escape. I mean, they still do.
Right. But it's not a fair fight.
It's not a fair contest.
Based on human capabilities and animal capabilities, like just natural capabilities, it's not a fair fight.
Yeah. And the participants aren't aware of the rules and didn't sign up to play the game.
Right. Yeah, they didn't volunteer to play.
Yeah, so it's stacked on the human side in terms of favor. So I think a really valid question to ask is, okay, hunting is conservation and hunting is necessary. If we take their arguments, hunting is necessary because deer and elk are overpopulating, right? I think it's a fair question to say, well, you've been using that argument that hunting is the only solution to overpopulation of deer. You've been using that argument forever, right?
Right.
So why is it still a problem? Why hasn't it solved the problem?
Interesting.
Why isn't it the answer? In fact, if anything, it seems like overpopulation of deer is getting worse. We were in Missoula this past summer and staying at an Airbnb up on the hill.
Right.
And I took walks in the morning in the yards, eating off the apple trees, or like all these deer.
Right.
And I grew up in Missoula, and once in a while you'd see a deer in town.
Yeah.
But this last summer they were everywhere. So why isn't hunting solving the problem? You say hunting is the solution, the necessary solution, but it doesn't seem to be solving the problem.
Right.
So again, removal of apex predators has had cascading effects. Trophic cascades is a term some biologists use in terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems around the world. To give just two from a growing litany of examples, since the eradication of pumas and gray and red wolves from the eastern United States, white-tailed deer have become unnaturally abundant and sedentary and are now browsing eastern deciduous forests to the ground. In the western U.S., since the extirpation of wolves, elk and or mule deer are similarly overpopulating and overbrowsing aspen groves and other sensitive plant communities. The science clearly shows that restoring the missing predators is essential to restoring the plant communities. And another thing we learned is that in some of these residential communities, they've had great success working primarily with the Humane Society at using like a contraception program to actually basically prohibit conception of and the breeding of these deer that are living in the residential areas. And like one place in New York, they started using these contraceptions. They administer primarily through the use of DART on the does. And one administration of this, it's basically a vaccine, would prohibit a doe from conceiving for like 3 to 5 years. And so they were seeing like a 60% reduction in their residential deer population. So again, hunting's not the only solution. In fact, it doesn't really seem to be the solution. It doesn't seem to be solving the problem. If we use some of the same philosophies that we use for our companion animals, that there are humane ways of just decreasing their numbers so they don't overpopulate. You know, there are other creative solutions available to us.
Yeah, that are in their best interest as well.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, no,
just ours.
100%. How often are we told to spay and neuter our animals? Right. And I believe we live somewhere where vets would do it for free. Right? Remember?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yep.
Also, did you guys know that there are deer farms in the United States?
That is crazy.
Yeah, that shocked me.
That is crazy.
Up to 4,000 in this country, deer farms.
I know. Does that not just trump the whole argument of overpopulation?
So we're so worried about these species overpopulating, and yet now we're starting to farm them.
Right. Well, it reminds me.
It's a bit of a joke.
No, it reminds me of these fish hatcheries. I mean, we have at least 2 around here, like within driving distance of where we live.
Yeah. To provide for the consumer demand, the tourist demand.
Right.
Which our natural rivers and lakes would never be able to supply.
100%.
That level of demand.
Like the area where we live is known as the fly fishing capital of the world. Well, there's fish hatcheries around here where they basically breed these fish and then stock the rivers.
And again, these agencies have, and in many places continue to stock our rivers and lakes, not just with indigenous species, but with foreign species that basically wipe out the indigenous fish and cause all kinds of other problems. And I think as people become a little bit more educated and enlightened, and hopefully, we see some of these things start to get scaled back, and less and less exotic species are being introduced for hunting pleasure and fishing pleasure.
But it's just a joke. I mean, it is a joke. These words are thrown out there, kind of like humane meat. I got to be honest with you, where people feel like they're doing something good, and they get to have their livelihood in their sport, and they get to buy all their gear, and they get to talk about their brand new gun they bought, and this new, what I mean? There's all of this. I mean, the hunting gear and the outdoor gear is like I'm sure it's $1 billion industry, billions of dollars, and very close to us is one of the biggest fly fishing companies that supplies fly fishing gear, like probably within 5 miles of us, and it's just crazy. Anyway, I can go on, but I mean, it's like it supports this livelihood at the same time you feel like you're doing something good. You're conserving, and some of these companies actually, you buy their product and they contribute money to some conservation company or organization.
Yeah, and that whole philosophy, like, I give this money and it protects the habitat for this animal. Well, you don't care about the animal, you just killed that animal. Like, and if you want to support conservation, just donate the money.
Right.
Like, why do you...
Right.
The whole idea that I have to donate this money, that gives me permission to go kill animals.
Right.
But that money, it's okay because that money is going to protect their habitat.
Yeah, and with that money, they will not go hunt these animals. They will reintroduce these species that are needed to balance out this ecosystem.
Yeah, it seems like the natural world can take care of itself in many ways when it comes to balancing ecosystems. So,
or we at least can try to recognize, okay, That's not working. We're having one of the biggest species extinctions of human history, and we need to start caring about the entire ecosystem,
right?
Not just protecting the ones we want to hunt and kill every year. But yeah, getting back to the whole phenomenon of deer farming, and I was happy to see in my research that there has been legislation in Montana that says no new deer farms can be established. So there's something about the Montana lawmakers that this is a turnoff to the idea of breeding and farming deer is not something they want.
It's probably because of all the ranches and all the ranchers.
But maybe the cattle
soliciting them.
But it's very big in Texas. A lot of these deer farms are in Texas. And, just reading from one kind of investigative article about this, this particular deer farmer sells mama deer for $3,000 to $5,000 each, who've been mounted by a big antlered sire buck. Buyers use the superior offspring of these pregnant does to improve the genetics of their own deer herd. So they're selling selectively bred genetics to other deer farmers.
Wow.
Or they turn them loose to let paying hunters shoot them. The hunts take place on private hunting ranches enclosed in high fences that keep the trophy animals in. So
Hunger Games.
No, seriously. It's almost like you're going to guaranteed. You pay probably thousands of dollars.
It is.
And you're
guaranteed
to get something.
A rack.
It's so strange.
Yeah.
It's really...
There's no chance of escape for these animals.
What kind of sport is this?
Yeah.
Are you proud of your trophy that you kind of manipulated into getting?
It is sadistic.
You paid money for it, basically.
Yeah. So the Texas Deer Association employs 3 lobbyists to advance its interests in Austin. Nationwide, an estimated 7,500 breeders of deer and elk are trying to create bigger and better animals to satisfy hunters' big antler envy. And he says, this farmer says, basically you take the best and breed them to the best, and it produces something better. And it's no different than what's been done in the horse industry, the cattle industry, the sheep industry, the goat industry. The only difference is this is a wildlife animal. And I like this because if this idea of selectively breeding deer to get bigger, better deer and then letting people pay to hunt them, and if this idea turns your stomach a little bit, it is kind of a wake-up call. I think that's sometimes we need a little bit of a wake-up call to be like, oh yeah, he's right. That's what we've been doing to cows and sheep and pigs and chickens. And somehow that we've gotten acclimated and we don't get offended.
Right. It's been normalized
in
our culture.
When we do it to those species of animals. But when we start doing it to deer, all of a sudden it does start to feel like that's twisted.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's
it.
Yeah. No, that's it, because that's why we demarcate, right? Wild animals versus like livestock, domesticated
they're
animals.
livestock now. Like if you breed them,
right,
they're livestock.
Exactly.
You're manipulating them. So.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little more local.
Yeah. Let's keep it local.
So, yeah, every state has a Fish and Wildlife Commission board members. That these board members are appointed by the governor. So, in our case, Governor Gianforte has appointed a board of Fish and Wildlife Commissioners. So, yeah, you'd hope that these people are knowledgeable about ecosystems and wildlife and healthy.
That they're biologists.
Yeah.
And they understand.
Yeah.
What's going on in the natural world.
What would you guess is the only listed requirement for being a healthy board of commissioners for fish and wildlife and parks?
Being a Montana resident?
I'm guessing a hunter has to be that, right?
Oh, you got to be a hunter?
So yeah, you definitely have to be what they call a user. So somebody who purchases hunting and fishing.
A user, huh? It sounds like a drug addiction.
Pay to use. But The only actual listed requirement, like I think the fact that you're a hunter and a fisher, that's just, what do you call it when it's not a written rule? It's an unwritten rule, I guess. But the only listed requirement is that, here it is, at least one member must be experienced in the breeding and management of domestic livestock.
Wow.
Okay, how does that make sense? You're appointing a board of people who are responsible for managing our wildlands and our wildlife and, our rivers and all of it.
Right.
And the only thing that you're going to require is that at least one of them has to be experienced in livestock breeding and livestock management. So that really betrays the fact that the real motivator here is whatever we do, our first priority is to protect
ranches.
Yes.
Ranch land.
The ranchers.
The ranch commodity.
The ranchers' interests.
Right.
And protect their livestock from the natural world.
That is crazy.
Yes, it's the reverse. It's protecting against the natural world, not protecting the wild lands, like the wildlife.
Yeah, so that organization in Montana is known as FWP. Is that right?
Yeah.
Fish, Wildlife, and Parks?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this particular group of commissioners that we have right now, they are all proud hunters and fisher people. And they
fisher
are
people.
Yeah, well, men and women.
Yep.
A lot of them grew up on ranches or manage their own ranches now. And let me just read. I'm just going to read. The Intercept did an article primarily focusing on, so The Intercept detailed in an investigation this past July that all but one of Gianforte's nominees were high-dollar contributors to his political campaigns. So being appointed onto this board of commissioners is really a reward to his big donors. So again, all but one of his nominees were high-dollar contributors to his political campaigns. One was his former running mate. The commissioners hailed from the trophy hunting, outfitting, oil and gas, and livestock industry. Gianforte did not select a single representative from Montana's expansive community of conservationists for the critical panel. Veteran Montana wildlife managers have accused the governor through his commission of tarnishing a respected and professional department and seeking to return the state to the 1880s when wolves were systematically extirpated from the landscape.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I was just looking online at you can go to FWP's website and you can look up the commission members, and yeah, it's just crazy that several of them have ranching background or are ranchers. Two of them at least own outdoor outfitting companies, right? Or they're connected, not own, but they work there, or they have connections to.
They have a vested interest, or you might even say a conflict of interest when it comes to actually caring about the ecosystems and the wildlife.
Right.
Yeah.
And like you said, gas and fuel. I think only one that I read so far has a degree in biology.
And
of sorts.
that could be actually a animal agriculture degree.
Oh.
Because they are into bioengineering.
Interesting.
So, yeah. So the commissioners appointed by Gianforte approved an array of highly controversial hunting and trapping methods in 2021, including the use of bait to lure wolves off protected lands, night hunting with night vision goggles, the use of snares, and an increase on bag limits that allowed a single individual to kill 20 wolves.
Damn.
So yeah, he's definitely coming out on the side of livestock ranching and not on the side of conservation, not on the side of actual taking care of wildlife.
I mean, it just raises the question, right? The lobbying power of the ranchers in Montana must be pretty powerful.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot more to be said, but
it's money.
On this subject, we also found a wildlife agency that a lot of people, including myself, have never even heard of, because it falls under, ironically, the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It's called the Wildlife Agency, I think is just the name of it. So one wildlife agency that you may have never heard of, because a lot of us, I don't think have ever heard of it, it's simply called Wildlife Services. And it's a secretive government agency, according to the Guardian article. But interestingly, it falls under the umbrella of the USDA. So it's a wildlife services agency that is in the Department of Agriculture.
Interesting.
That doesn't make much sense.
And it says, the Guardian article reads, if you haven't heard of the U.S. agency, you're not alone. Its name is Wildlife Services, and for years it has operated in relative obscurity with limited oversight from Congress or the American public. Housed in the Department of Agriculture, the agency primarily works on behalf of private ranchers and farmers, killing coyotes, wolves, bears, birds, and other creatures that cause problems for agricultural interests. In 2018, it exterminated nearly 1.5 native animals and a huge number of invasive animals as well. Sometimes its agents shoot wolves or coyotes from helicopters. Sometimes they employ leg traps and snares. And sometimes they place poison devices on public and private land. M44s, also known as cyanide bombs, are baited and spring-loaded tubes that spray an orange plume of cyanide powder when triggered, aimed at coyotes and other canids that predate livestock. They killed 6,500 animals in 2018 alone. So
wow,
this agency is going out at the behest of ranchers and farmers and animal farmers to basically wipe out wildlife. And so they're planting these cyanide bombs. And this particular article came out and was getting a lot of recognition and notice because it focuses on, there's a young boy walking his dog out near his home, and the dog was interested in the bait on one of these cyanide bombs and triggered the bomb, and it killed the dog and poisoned the child.
Jeez.
Who did survive. But so yeah, this is going on. This is one of the government agencies that supposedly is.
That's crazy. Cyanide bombs. I mean, it's funny, right? When white powder shows up in some envelope, to some politician in Washington, D.C., people have a serious problem with it. Everyone's scared, but we're launching cyanide bombs out in the wild to kill animals, and it's affecting...
That's supposed to be conservation.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
M44s.
Putting poison in random natural
This is
places.
crazy.
Yeah.
So in May of 2020, I found an article that says Wildlife Services will limit use of cyanide traps in Montana. But you read through it, it says the federal agency agreed to temporarily limit how and where it kills wildlife that threaten livestock in Montana. So they were putting a little moratorium on it while they kind of researched and decided how they can do it better or
but yeah, we've done this in Montana.
Evaluate.
We've used cyanide bombs, M44s in Montana. That's crazy. And everyone here loves to hike. Can you imagine? Yeah, if you're hiking and then you get hit with a plume of orange powder, you might want to run to the hospital.
So as we've seen, the animal agriculture industry is married to the hunting culture. They both are in this paradigm of domination, and that we need animal agriculture and we need to be the apex predators out there hunting and protecting ranchers. And this paradigm has not served us. It's not working. I mean, there's so many reasons why animal agriculture is really taxing the environment.
Right.
And causing all kinds of problems. And so to get back to like the rewilding vision, like we were reading that if we were just to walk away from animal agriculture, it would solve so many problems. And if we went plant-based, for example, in alignment with this rewilding idea. So right now, 50% of the land in the continental United States is used for animal agriculture. And if we went on a plant-based diet, we could free up 75% of that land, because it's not only just the land that the animals are on, it's also all the crops that we grow to feed those livestock. So so much of that land is just taken up by animal agriculture. And as we've talked before, it's so inefficient. It's so much of our land for so few calories that you get out of it. It's just crazy. And so go ahead.
And 70% of the crops in the US are fed to animals that are in the animal agriculture. So that's huge.
Yeah. So if we took out the animal and we just ate the plants, we would need less farmland, which would end up just leading to rewilding so seamlessly.
Right. When I feel like it's just unnecessary, right? I feel like we're not in a survival situation. Our country, people don't really need to hunt for survival. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. I just watched a video of Dr. Milton Mills. He's a plant-based doctor, vegan doctor, and he was essentially saying at a biochemical level, all protein starts with plants. Mm-hmm. All protein, mm-hmm. all protein starts with plants. So it's completely unnecessary. The human body biochemically only needs protein, and that protein can come from plants. It doesn't need to come from animals.
Yeah. So again, going back to the rewilding idea, they just begin with a different assumption. Their assumption is that most of the world ought to be wild. Extinction is the overarching crisis of our time, and that we modern humans have an ethical obligation to protect and restore wild nature. Rewilding leaders maintain that it is not enough to preserve remaining pieces of wild earth, but it is also necessary to restore big, wild, connected areas complete with top predators like wolves and great cats and sharks who keep ecosystems bountiful and beautiful. So I encourage you, I know I'm really intrigued by this rewilding movement, and I encourage our listeners to look into it as well. And going back to what we kind of started with, that hunting is such a culturally it's passed on from generation to generation culturally, because and we definitely see it in our community where we live here in Montana. And I found it a very interesting experience this past week. We kind of finished our day reading the storybook, the very famous storybook called Ferdinand.
You're a teacher and you're reading this to your preschool.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
You guys know the story of Ferdinand. He's a bull in Spain.
Yeah.
And all the other bulls around him wanted to go to the bullfight, and he didn't. But he ends up getting sent to the bullfight. But because he refuses to fight, basically, they just let him go home. But the book talks about all these weapons that they use on the bulls to stab them and stick into them. And I'm just reading the book, going about my business. And the children started being like, that is so mean. That is so mean. They would kill him with that. And I'm like, they do kill the bull at a bullfight. The ironic thing about this event is that earlier that morning, one of the children had brought in the skull and antlers of an elk that his dad just killed this hunting season. And I mean, it was very clearly brand new because it still had like some of the skin and the blood was still on the skull.
Wow.
And he brings it in so proudly. And all the children were like, that is so cool. Your dad killed that? That is so cool. And I'm thinking, this is so interesting. The same children, the same day, are having opposite reactions to the unnecessary killing of a beautiful animal. When they hear it in a story, they're like, that is so mean. Well, these children weren't enculturated into the culture of bullfighting. They didn't grow up in Spain, where their dads were like taking them to bullfights and saying, someday you could be a matador or whatever. So they see it from the outsider perspective of this is wrong. But they are growing up in a culture that celebrates hunting, where dad gets ready to go hunting and hangs out with his buddies and has so much fun. It's a highlight of the year. And
they talk about their guns and their gear.
Yeah, and someday, son, you're going to be old enough and you're going to go hunting with me. And there's so much pride and love and connection. And so it's this very interesting thing that we're passing on. And, I think it's just something to stop and look at and think about the power that we have as parents.
Right.
And what we're sending our children in terms of what is okay, what is normal, what is good. And I think we're really responsible for what we're teaching our children.
Right, and it also speaks that anecdote you just told, it speaks to the power of our culture and how powerful culture is and how every culture is different. But even here, right, this is what I think vegans try to do, is try to break through those cultural barriers In terms of like around here, dogs and cats, nobody would think of abusing them or eating them or anything like that in this culture, but in other cultures, they eat them. So, that's what we're always trying to do is break down the cultural barriers. And that's crazy. And that's a great illustration.
What's the difference between those animals? Like, are they really that different? And also between them and us.
Yeah.
What makes it okay to kill us, not to kill them and not us,
Right.
Yeah. So as we are drawing to a close, summing up, what do you guys think are some of the biggest takeaways from this conversation?
Well, I think what's fascinating for me, to learn about these deer farms and to learn about cyanide bombs, but also I think the biggest thing is we find animal agriculture is connected to issues with climate change. It's connected to issues with big pharma, our health. It's connected to ecological disaster, species extinction. Oh, now guess what? It's also connected to hunting. It's just like crazy. I mean, like it's the problem.
It's powerful. It's a powerful
It's massive,
force.
and it is the problem.
And it seems to be like, everything is like in a constellation around it. Like it's the center of the universe.
It's the center, yeah.
And everything is kind of rotating around it.
Right. And like you keep saying, everyone feels like it's so necessary. Like we need it. We don't need it at all.
Also, something that, it's important is that if we all switch to a plant-based diet and further than that, we dropped leather in all animal products because they are part of this all animal agriculture and its impacts, we could rewild so much of our land.
100%.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, I think for me, it's like, the old paradigm, maybe it served its purpose, and we are a species of creativity, and we can acknowledge that, okay, it's not serving us anymore.
Right.
And it's time to start thinking about a new paradigm, get creative in the ways we manage wildlife. And I think also that right now, it's been, for its whole history, hunters have been the only people at the table when it comes to how do we manage wildlife and our wildlands. And that's wrong. One special interest group is not the only people who enjoy and use and benefit from our wildlife and our wildlands. Like, there's so many, they far outnumber hunters, the hikers, the rock climbers, the bird watchers, the people who like to camp. And, there's so many people who love our lands and want to be a part of the conservation question, and they shouldn't be kept from joining the conversation anymore.
So remembering that we would never do this to resolve the problems of stray dogs. We would never go and shoot a bunch of stray dogs to resolve to solve the overpopulation problem.
Right.
And remembering that these wild animals are also individuals.
Right. 100%.
So to wrap up, there's this really cool quote from Sir David Attenborough. To restore stability to our planet, we must restore its biodiversity, the very thing that we've removed. It's the only way out of this crisis we've created. We must rewild the world.
Wow.
Well said.
Yeah, that's an awesome quote. That's the truth, though.
Yeah.
And go vegan. We need to go vegan.
Yeah, a new paradigm we need to adopt, and we welcome everybody to really consider that.
100%. Like you said, we're creative people. That's what we do. We create solutions. So let's start thinking about some creative solutions to this problem.
And get out of the archaic, outdated
100%.
way of doing things.
And create cultures that are win-wins.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. All right. Till next time.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Yep.
Bye, everybody.
See ya.